Uh, can anyone confirm if you're live on chat? Yep, GM everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think there are multiple time zones here, so I just want to be inclusive here. Uh, Thank you everyone. I'm Parth. I'm representing the product folks today. At the product house. Sorry, bad habits. But yeah, again, this is probably the last session we're here together for, and it's a light session, but a really special one. Uh, just a quick intro about the product house. It's a volunteer-driven community of all things Web3, crypto, blockchain. I don't think I need to tell a little more, but I want to especially thank all our partners, Polygon, Alpha Wave, for supporting this in this initiative, which is finally coming to an end. Apart from that, also giving a huge shout out to our ecosystem partners, Obvious, Digital Economy, CoinShift, Airmeet, DeFi, on Juno, Plotex, Pillow, EPNS, MetaMask, Arcana. And this would never have been possible with you folks being a part of our support group. Uh, okay, today's session is special. It has one of the most interesting lineups that we have had till now. We have Namit with us. Namit is a dear friend of mine. We have worked together in the past and at a fintech. He currently runs a Web3 company. He runs a really interesting newsletter called The Token Dispatch. You should definitely check out. And he runs a Asset Money, which is an NFT management platform. Again, Namit, as I said, is one of the most thoughtful people in Web3 at the moment. If you want to, I think you've already had a session with him before, but if you want to pick his brains, drop him something on Twitter. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Namit. He'll be our moderator for the Fireside chat. Namit, I think you're on mute.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Nice to meet everyone. Good morning. The good part
Yeah.
about Web3 is it's always morning.
GM. All right. On the other side, we have a very special guest. I think we have waited for Pomp for almost 1 year. I've been chasing him. And Pomp has one of the most diverse backgrounds. He served in the US Army as a sergeant, and then he worked with Facebook as a product manager, which a lot of us folks are. And then he ran a crypto fund at Morgan Greek Capital. Now he writes one of the most interesting crypto out there. So welcome, Pomp. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah,
How are you
so,
guys? Thanks for having me.
thank you so much. So without any further wasting of time, let's start this convo. Over to you two, and bang bang in the typical Pomp voice. Pomp, can you start with that for us?
Of course, bang, bang. Let's do it.
Yep.
Absolutely. Pomp, very nice to meet you. I was actually reading up on the last newsletter that you sent out, I think a couple of days ago, around the 10 billion Bitcoin bet on stablecoins and seemed very interesting. We will jump into that. But I wanted to start off with something fairly simple. Are you reading anything these days?
Yeah, I've been reading a number of different books. Probably the one that is most relevant for this audience. I just finished last night, The Power Law. It's a book all about the history of venture capital. And it's got a ton of anecdotal stories that are pretty cool. Everything from super, beginning of Sequoia, Benchmark, and a number of those firms, all the way up to the Tiger Globals, DSTs, and Andreessen Horowitz. So it's a great one. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I was reading a book called Capital Allocators some time ago and had a very similar feel around essentially looking at how do you go from building to making strategic decisions around allocation of capital. Okay, I wanted to start
Correct.
off right here on. I've seen you building a bunch of things in this space, and I wanted to ask you, with the sort of expertise you've had building as well as investing in companies, according to you, what's the one thing that you think is definitely going to work in crypto and one thing that isn't going to stay around for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I always start with like, no one knows the future. And so I think to answer this question, you have to have a probabilistic analysis. And when you see that, I think the market has determined Bitcoin is the thing that is most likely to last. It's the most durable. It's the thing that people right now are putting the most value in based on market cap, et cetera. And so there's pros and cons to the market determining that Bitcoin is the thing that's likely to be the most durable. Obviously, the pros are it's very valuable today. Lots of people hold it, and people are going to continue to use it. The cons are if you're here to find 1,000x returns and kind of speculate. There's not as much risk with Bitcoin, and so as with all investments, less risk usually means less return. And so I think that's probably the thing that myself and it appears the market has determined is most likely to be around 50 years from now. The second thing is I tend to believe that most of the ideas are right in crypto in terms of what people are working on. But just like in the internet in the late 90s, most of the first iterations actually were not successful. So if you go back and you look, people tried to do music streaming, they tried to do food delivery, they tried to do a bunch of these ideas, and they were right. It just took a whole nother decade before those iterations ended up being those successful ones that scaled globally and became multi-billion-dollar companies. Now, you can ask yourself, why is that? Some of it was we needed infrastructure in place, both on the internet, but also in the mid to late 90s, people were still using dial-up. It just wasn't very pervasive. It wasn't very fast, right? Unfortunately, there was many places around the world that didn't even have internet access at that point. And so we had to go and get that infrastructure in place. The second thing is I think that consumer behaviors had to change. You can go back and look at a lot of the videos of like 95, 96, 97, and people are like, what is the internet, right? And kind of all the things that we laugh about now. But it's just people had to learn, what is this? How do I use it? I don't have a computer. How do I get a computer? All that stuff. And then lastly, I think that there is this element of the entrepreneurs and investors have to learn. So if you really go back and you think about it, the playbooks that we have today that have been popularized by blogs and podcasts, the Y Combinators of the world, all this information that's out there, most people on this call would say, okay, if I want to build a product, here's best practices. If I want to build a company, here's how I do fundraising. Even the idea of a SAFE, right? The standard agreement for future equity, like that wasn't in place. And so every single time someone wanted to raise money, they would have to go negotiate, do all this stuff. All of those things that became standardized or ultimately got kind of figured out and open sourced in a way that drove so much of what made kind of technology and the internet so valuable today. It just wasn't around it. I think that's what we're happening right now in crypto. And I'll give you kind of one example. Is if you think about, let's say, DAOs, right? If I said to you, what's the successful way to create, launch, and scale a DAO? Everyone has a different opinion. And everyone's trying different things. And there's experimentation going on, that there's people trying to innovate, all this stuff. I don't think that we know right now what the right way to do it is. Now, I believe, just like many people, that there's going to be some version of DAOs in the future that are super, super valuable. It's just like, what's best practices? Nobody knows yet. And so like the problem is we have to go through that process of experimentation to figure out the right one, the right kind of mechanism. But I do think that that's like a pretty good example of like where we're going and how much work is still ahead of us to make sure that this is successful.
That's very interesting because, like you mentioned, most of the best practices, while they may be structural, may go out of the window when we look at things from a decentralized point of view. But do you think this time around it will be a 30-year cycle like it's taken us from 1990 to here, or this time around with almost everyone in the world having some sort of access to the internet and wanting to move on and move up, right? Do you think this time the cycles might be slightly compressed?
Yeah, well, so definitely, crypto in general, we're talking about Bitcoin, NFTs, DAOs, whatever it is. When you think about the adoption of these technologies, it's happening on the back of the internet, right? We couldn't obviously have adoption of these technologies if we didn't have the internet. And I think a lot about like in the 90s, if crypto had come out, we wouldn't be nearly as popular in 13 years as we are today, right? And same thing in the 2000s, same thing in the 2010s. And so ultimately, I think that you have to have internet. Now, what's very interesting is, for example, the internet penetration is getting higher across the world.
Yeah.
But mobile penetration is also accelerating. And so whether we're talking about India, we're talking about various countries in Africa, Central America, South America, other parts of Asia, etc. There's a lot of folks who have mobile devices. They don't have desktop. They don't have kind of traditional web. And so when you think about that, you then start to say like, wow, we may actually be getting an incredible adoption in mobile and internet, but not necessarily that desktop stuff. And so I'll give you two examples. Is one, I know we're going to talk about it later, but I came to India in, I believe it was 2016 into 2017, spent about 2.5 weeks, and went all around the country. And when I was there, the mobile penetration blew me away, right? Just in terms of, it seemed like everyone had a mobile device, and that was really cool to see. And then also, I went to Nigeria, I believe in either 2015 or 2016, and same thing there, was that the mobile penetration was off the charts, but people didn't have a computer at home. And it wasn't because they couldn't afford it or anything like that. It was, this was how the community and the economy operated, was you had mobile payments and all this stuff. So I think crypto is uniquely suited to benefit from these trends, but we had to have this sequence. We had to have the internet penetration go out, then we had to have mobile penetration, and now we're getting into this idea of crypto ended up being valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. So prior to doing this, I was actually building a payments org across 40 countries, and we realized that in almost all, the first point of initiation was actually mobile, and they were just used to mobile, right? None of them had handheld devices, and hence businesses then transformed to operate mobile first. I think we still have some sort of journey to make there when it comes to decentralized apps right now operating on mobile, but I think it might be a matter of time before we get there. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. So jumping on from there, quick check on, we've seen the rise of stable coins coming up across the world, right? And there are disparate views, right? A bunch of folks say, hey, this may just be the instrument that brings the next 100 million people in because they're backed by a local government who's happy to push them. And there are a bunch of folks like us who say, hey, but that's not truly decentralized at all. And at the end of the day, somebody issues them. Do you have any views on stable coins, right? Is it good, bad? Will it increase adoption? Is that the Trojan horse that brings the next 500 million people in?
I mean, look, the market is saying that they're super freaking valuable, right? There's almost $200 billion of stable coins. Who cares about my opinion? When you look at that, ultimately what we're watching with the stable coins, I think there's a bifurcation in the market. The first thing is a technology upgrade. So, for example, dollars. A lot of people around the world want to use US dollars. There's a belief that it's stable. There's a belief that it's not going to, hit hyperinflation. We'll see. But there's this confidence in the US dollar. The problem becomes either one, it's super expensive, dangerous, etc., for me to get access to dollars. So if I'm in a country where my currency has failed, there's all sorts of issues. And then the second thing is that it may not actually be the single best payment rail for me to use in dollars if the bank isn't open on the weekends, or it's expensive for me to actually do remittances, etc. And so when you think about that, a stable coin is just a technology evolution or a technology improvement. It takes the exact same monetary policy, the exact same asset, it puts it in this new technology form factor, and now it increases global accessibility to, let's say, the dollar or any other currency. It also decreases the friction, both in cost and time, to use this. So in that sense, it's making these assets more attractive. It's driving more adoption of them. And it's just a technology improvement. Now, the second piece that we get is what I'll call these new versions of stablecoins. It's trying to get to stable value, but it may not just be replicating the fiat currency on a new technology rail. This is things like the algorithmic stablecoins. This is now you see the Terra ecosystem trying to back UST by Bitcoin. There's a bunch of different iterations, and people are trying to figure out what to do or how to do it. And I think that both of these are going to be valuable, both taking fiat currencies and just putting them on new technology rails, but also these new iterations of how do we get stable value in a truly digital world or in a crypto native world. And again, it goes back to this idea of people want to have reduced friction in terms of time of transactions and cost of transactions. And people also want to have an increase in accessibility. And now what we are watching is this decades-long trend. Anyone with an internet connection, you can have mobile, you can have web, you can be literally in the heart of New York City, or you can be in the middle of nowhere and you're literally the only person with an internet connection. As long as you have that internet connection, you can transact in the global financial system. And that is a very, very powerful idea. And so, of course, stable value or stable coins will be a huge piece of that. the question just becomes like, what's going to be the most valuable ones? And I think that the market is trying to figure that out now.
Yeah. So in fact, that's the one that I was going to ask you about, especially with Terra currently experimenting with not just burning USDC, but actually trying to buy Bitcoin against that. Right? Any thoughts on and I know it's an experiment right now. Do you see that happening more and more? Because buying that as an asset is definitely, as in buying Bitcoin as an asset would be incredibly stable and limited. Is that something that you think could actually work out?
Yeah, so I think their argument, right? I published yesterday an episode with Do Kwon, and what he basically said to me was, he said, Bitcoin is the most pristine collateral, right?
Yeah.
It's decentralized, it can't be debased, like all the things that we know that make Bitcoin valuable. And so his point was, if it's the most pristine collateral or the superior collateral, then of course you want your stablecoin to be backed by that asset. Now, with that said, the downsides or the potential risks are it could be volatile, it could have all these issues. And so what I think that's where the experimentation comes in, is like, hey, what are those downsides? Now, if you were to ask them, okay, compare the Bitcoin-backed stablecoin versus a non-Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, I think in their mind, they have come to the conclusion that the non-Bitcoin-backed stablecoin is actually riskier, and there's a potential higher percentage of failure or impairment, et cetera, than having the Bitcoin-backed one. So that's an interesting thing where risk is relative. And so what they're doing is, by adopting this kind of quote unquote Bitcoin standard for their stablecoin, it's actually reducing risk in their mind. So I think that's a big piece. The other thing that I would say is if they are successful, which I actually believe they will be successful here, but if they are successful, they are going to create the playbook. Just like MicroStrategy, the publicly traded company that first bought Bitcoin, created the corporate playbook to adopt Bitcoin on your balance sheet, I think that Terra/Luna/UST will be the first to create the playbook to how do you back a non-Bitcoin currency with Bitcoin. And so some stable coins will just say, hey, give me the playbook, I'll go replicate it. But some central banks are going to look at that and say, should we back the rupee with Bitcoin? Should we back the dollar with Bitcoin? Now, obviously, there's some countries that are going to be way more excited about this than other countries. But I think that that's what we're going to start watching here, is that's going to enter the conversation. People are going to ask themselves, hey, what's going on with this? Should I start to do this myself?
That's going to be very interesting, because as the adoption of any country's stablecoin sort of goes up, there are also geopolitical issues. Very interesting, slightly early to look at them right now. But the outsized influence that can buy you across the world in a world which is yet not regulated could be extremely lucrative for, like you said, for the one who decides to take it up.
Correct. I have this saying, it's actually in my drafts, maybe I'll tweet it today, which is the first country to go back to a sound money standard, they're going to have a significant advantage globally, right? When the world's gone mad, if you can be the first to return back to sanity, you're in a pretty good position. So let's see who does it.
Oh, that sounds incredible. Okay, so looking at while we started with stable coins, I was actually going to ask you, do you think other forms of entering the space, something that is slightly more on the consumer side of things, which is essentially NFTs, is something that people find relatable, while they may come in either for the art or for the utility, or for whatever that is, right? It's a little more consumer friendly. Do you think that could be a way to bring in the next 500 million people? Is that something that could work?
Yeah, so I always talk to people usually through the Bitcoin lens, but NFTs is another good example. I say, what are the use cases for these technologies? And people, in speaking about Bitcoin, they'll say, it's a store of value, it's a medium of exchange, right? But they always forget the third one, which is it's speculation. And NFTs is a perfect example as well. The entire reason why people adopt Bitcoin, regardless of what they say, no one wants to admit it, but they initially show up because they think they're going to get rich. Right? There's some asset, it goes up and down in price. When it starts to go up, a bunch of people run in. It's human greed. This is a story as old as time. And ultimately what we have is, in the boom cycles, more and more people come in. Bitcoin's price acts as a marketing department for the asset. And people show up, they think they're going to get rich. Then they start to learn. They start to learn about fiat currencies and debasement and sound money. And then they stick around. They're like, oh, this is so much more than just quote unquote getting rich. I think NFTs is another example of this, where lots and lots of people come in and they basically think they're going to get rich. right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh
Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
I'm gonna buy the ape and it's gonna double in price. I'm gonna buy the
Yeah.
punk and it's gonna go up. And so when you think about that, that's not bad, right?
Yeah.
Like speculation drives so much of what we do in the world. And so when that occurs, now all of a sudden people come in for that, and then they start to think about themselves,
Okay.
what do I own? Oh, this is digital property rights. That's interesting. Oh, what about this other use case? What about ticketing as an NFT? What about this idea of being able to actually join a community? And they start to learn. So I think that the kind of attraction is pure economic incentive,
Oh,
pure human
100%.
greed. But that's not a negative thing in the sense. Now, can it get to overheated situations? Of course. Sometimes Bitcoin's price gets ahead of itself. Sometimes NFT prices get ahead of themselves. That's natural as well. But I do think that if you look out over a 10, 20-year time frame, NFTs are going to be here. Bitcoin's going to be here. All of this stuff's going to be here. It's just that we need the economic incentive to be that attraction into the market. And if you look, NFT's been growing pretty fast. What does that mean? It means that a lot of people think they're going to get rich, right? And so now the point of the community, I think, is we got to educate people once they get here and start trying to make sure they understand what is actually going on and how can we use these technologies moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. I was speaking to somebody last week who said, but don't you think that there is an extreme financialization of everything? Right. And the way I see
Of
it is
course.
at the beginning of any cycle, well, that's the incentive for people to come in, for them to change their behaviors, to adopt something new. Financialization is how you get started. It happened with mobile gaming. It happened with gaming in general. It happened with almost everything. And it's the same that will happen with these technologies.
People always try to point to things that have nothing to do with finance, right? So take sports for a second, whether it's cricket, American football, basketball, whatever, pick your sport. A big portion of the viewership watches because they're betting on the game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is the percentage of the sports audience that would disappear if you weren't able to bet? Right?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Maybe it was 20%. I don't know what the number is, but there's speculation in a ton of different parts of society. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's just understanding human nature, understanding how this stuff works. And then I think what it comes down to is figuring out where's the healthy part of the speculation.
Yeah.
And it's the job of the community to make sure that people get as educated as possible so they don't make dumb decisions.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're in that stage where education about everything, right? How does this work? What do you do? How do you keep your assets safe? Is something that a lot of people will learn, hopefully the good way and not the hard way. But it is
Correct.
something. It is something, hopefully, that the community takes up. On the other hand, then, what do you think right now are some of the bottlenecks to mass adoption? What do you think is not there yet? Like, something that I think about is, do you think the difficulty in setting up a wallet is right? But I don't know, which is why. So, what do you think are the bottlenecks right now just for mass adoption?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, right? I would say probably at the biggest scale, just time. Like this
Okay.
stuff takes a lot of time.
Time.
People have to hear about it a bunch of times, right? Their friends have to start to do it. So like just the expiration of time is a huge, huge piece. And that sucks because unfortunately, or fortunately, humans can't accelerate time. Like it's
Yeah.
just time expires, right? So you got to just kind of patiently wait. The second thing is there's a lot of user experience stuff that needs to be improved.
Yeah.
So if you go back again to the internet, using that as a guide, there was a time in the internet where you basically had to type in IP addresses.
Yeah.
So if you got on the internet and you typed in, 101.9.73.321, that brought you to
somewhere.
what is now known as google.com, right?
Yeah.
And like that sucked because you had to remember it. I joke that like whether we're talking about IP addresses and human readable URLs, or we're talking about your phone book, there was a point in history where if you wanted to call your friend, you better have either written down their number in like a piece of paper or you had it memorized. Now in your phone book, you just have it saved as their name. You hit their name and you're good to go. A lot of that stuff's got to happen here, wallet addresses, etc. And so we got to improve the user experience to get the mainstream non-technical audience to be able to adopt these technologies. The third thing is I actually think that we got to get a bunch of product development underway. So not just user experience, but like right now, if you come into the crypto industry and you're not a gambler, right? You're not a speculator and you don't want to just sit and hold Bitcoin. What are the things you can do? Well, there are some financial services that you can go ahead and use. But if you start to really think about like, what are the things that work? There's not a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's because we're experimenting. We're trying to innovate. We're trying to figure it out. We got to figure that stuff out. And I think that then leads to adoption. It's like the mainstream audience shows up when they're convinced the things work.
Yeah.
Right. And so the internet, a great example, is the internet was around way before 97, 98, 99, 2000. It was just, it didn't really, quote unquote, work, right, until we got to that point. Once we got to that point where it worked and AOL could just send you the CD-ROM in the United States to your mailbox and you plug it in your computer, right, then all of a sudden we started to use the internet. And so I think that's what we're at here now is we're getting closer, but we still have a lot of product development we need to do in order to keep driving that adoption of the non-technical kind of more mainstream audience.
Yeah, and I do see a lot of people jumping over from existing, let's say, Web2 companies, sort of coming here and trying to figure out how they can start. And then an incredible number of folks who are extremely young, either in school or college or just out yet, trying to jump in and get started with building these experiences. And hopefully those should come right around the corner.
Correct. I think a huge piece of this is the younger generation also has to mature into positions of power, influence, wealth, etc. And so, like, the joke is always, there's politicians in the U.S. I'm more familiar with that political environment, but there's politicians in the United States that don't have the ability to use their computer very well, or they may not actually know how to use email, right? Like they're 80 years old. They just weren't around for that technology. And so naturally it was something young people did and they never got around to kind of adopting the technology. Now there's some politicians who they're my age, they grew up on the internet, right? And so they get it. They know how these technologies work. And I think that's what we're going to see with crypto is 20 years from now, every single politician is going to be a crypto user in some form or fashion because they grew up on it. We just need time for these young people to kind of mature into those positions. The second thing is, I think that we also will permeate into the education realm as well. So in the US, we now have most major institutions at the higher education level now have some sort of focus on cryptocurrencies, whether it's a research center, whether it's classes, whether it's something. My guess is that's going to happen internationally as well, is across the world, we're going to see more and more education around this stuff. And so it takes time. And that's part of time expiring as young people grow up. But every single generation from here on is going to be crypto native, right? Yeah. Just like every single generation, after, I don't know, 95, 2000, every single one of those is internet native. That is a good sign for the future. It's just this weird transition period that we got to get through.
Well, that sounds fantastic. And if we then assume that a bunch of builders, leaders, and politicians essentially will be at some point of time over the next decade and a half crypto native, do you think there is a need to relook at what public policy or government policy could look like in view of what's happening or what's changing?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the US and India, right? I think that most Americans would be like, I don't know if our politicians really get how important this is. I don't know if they're really, excited about this like they should be. India even took it a step further and, whether they banned it, didn't ban it, there was all the kind of controversy and conversation, et cetera. I think ultimately there's a lot of folks who just say, look, there's one data point that matters. And that data point is the people want this. Yep. And in the United States, the number is, 15%, it's estimated, of Americans have it. Tens of millions of Americans. It's nearly impossible for them to be anti-Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies at this point, because if you are, you're likely to get voted out of office or you're likely not to get elected. Now, India, a little bit different, right? But still, I think very similar to the United States from a trend standpoint, in that you're getting deep penetration. And politicians ultimately, regardless of how crazy they can be, how, kind of detached from reality, I think people sometimes think they are, they listen to their constituents. Because if you make enough noise, if you do enough, right, they'll pay attention. And, I've tweeted before the hashtag, India wants crypto and all that stuff. Like, they're paying attention. They know. They may pretend they don't, but they're listening. And I think that that's a very positive thing for citizens to know, because then they participate in the democratic kind of conversation. But also it puts the politicians on notice. If you're anti this industry, it's probably not a good career move. And so that ends up being a pretty good thing as well.
Okay, that sounds so. Yeah, absolutely. And India, with both, right? So financial regulation as well as crypto regulation, the government has been fairly forthcoming to say we're going to sort of hear all these points. And the good part is at least we're at a stage where there is clarity, which means, hey, here are a bunch of things that are okay. Here are a bunch of things that are not. I don't know if you know, actually, India from 1st of April, which is 10 days from now, will actually start taxing cryptocurrency in a way where there is some sort of clarity around what's happening, which means for most people here who were in a regulatory ambit where they didn't know what was happening, well, that sort of goes away. And hopefully that brings in a few more tens of people, tens of millions of people into this space. Right. Jumping on from the way countries are looking at this, I'm also looking at a bunch of funds deploying into this space and trying to also do two things. One is figure out what the future looks like and how we can back it. But two is also at their end figure out how do we structure something like this, right? With decentralization, owning a large part of an entity sort of becomes slightly complicated. Question there is a bunch of fairly prominent people have been talking about how large companies or large companies in this space are now significantly owned by VCs, right? Is there a thought there? As in, how do you see this?
I think people are all worried about the wrong thing, which is if you really look at the problem, there's nothing to do with VCs or any of that stuff. Venture capital has funded more innovation
Yep.
than any other group of people on the planet over the last 50 years.
Over time. Yep.
And what I always tell people is if you switch the nomenclature and you call it risk capital rather than venture capital, guess what? They're the only people willing to risk their money on these crazy ideas, right? Go to the bank and try to get a loan to build the company. The bank's like, hell no, there's no way this is going to work, right? If you go to even your parents, they're like, hell no, I'm not giving you money for your crazy idea. The risk capital is what they do. They risk the money. Now, of course, for that risk that they take, they earn a profit. So that's the whole point of venture capital. It drove so much innovation, et cetera. Now, this specific industry is unique in that there's actually more than just the official organizations that are willing to risk the capital. So individuals around the world are like, well, venture capital sounds like a pretty good idea. I'll risk some capital, right? But I don't need to be known as a VC. But every single individual who is contributing capital, whether they call themselves a venture capitalist or not, they're a venture capitalist. They're risking the capital on a wild idea. And so in some way, what we've got is a democratization now. More players can participate in the idea of risking capital. Now, the reason why I say it that way is because it's not actually a VC versus not VC. Every single investor in these projects is a VC, whether you think of yourself as a user or as a VC. The problem becomes how much concentration does any one participant own? And I think that's the real issue that people are trying to get at. So it's easy and it's kind of like a meme to be like, oh, you know, screw the VCs. But if you really start to look at it and you say, okay, maybe no one organization or individual should own more than X%, right? We're trying to be decentralized or whatever. When you think of it that way, now who the hell cares? I don't care if you're a banker, a VC, a user, a public company, a private company, or you're literally just a person who got lucky. Who cares? Nobody should own more than X%. I think that's the thing to focus in on. And what it does is it says in a funding round, in my opinion, if I was starting some sort of project, I would want all the different types of users. I would want the diversity. I want some of the venture capital firms because they have specific things they can do that no one else can do. I want some of the users because they have a specific thing that no one else can do. I want operators who have built successful businesses before because they bring certain value, right? I want all these different things. And together as a team, now I've got these skill sets, these experiences, these networks at my disposal as I build something. So I think that that's really the big thing is this concentration of ownership is the issue that people are trying to get at. And I don't know if there's a right answer. Like, what is the percentage? Should no one own more than 1%? Should no one own more than 10%? Should no one own more than 50%? Like, we got to figure it out. I'm not smart enough to figure it out, right? I'm going to wait for the market to figure it out, and then I'll go yell and scream and tell everyone, hey, here's the right way to do it. Here's the playbook. But we just got to figure out what that is first.
So that sounds very interesting, and I think that's largely the debate that sort of goes around. In tune with that, right? In tune with capital. The other question that I've heard very often is, does it make sense to let go of decentralization up to a certain degree to enable a bunch of people to come on, and the services that they essentially are looking for are things like customer support, or essentially having the ability to speak with someone, and that's something that centralization could bring on. So for example, if I'm looking at NFTs, I could buy them on the blockchain, but I could also buy them directly on OpenSea, and I would prefer to do that because a bunch of experiences here are controlled. Any thoughts on centralization for mass adoption? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone, decentralization is a great idea if you're optimizing for security. The whole point of decentralization is to enhance security,
Yep.
sovereignty, right? All these ideas. If you go back and look at the Bitcoin white paper, it's a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The whole idea is that we don't want the middleman. So what do? We strip out the middleman. So how then do we get it? Well, we have to have a decentralized peer-to-peer system. Okay, what is that good for? That's really, really good for security, sovereignty, etc. Guess what it's not good at? Efficiency.
Yep.
It sucks as an efficient system. And I always joke that, why is Amazon the most valuable company in the world? Because the most efficient company.
Yep.
Efficiency usually leads to value creation. If I need 100 people to do something, but I can create a piece of technology that ends up being a centralized, efficient system, and now I only need 2 employees, guess what? I make more money. I'm more efficient. I'm more valuable, right?
Yep.
So I think the whole crypto world is going to like relearn why efficiency is so important.
Yep.
And if you go back and you actually study like the Industrial Revolution, right? It was very clear. The creation of double entry accounting led to the ability to now get corporations. Corporations allowed us to collect, organize, and deploy resources, both people and capital, in a highly efficient manner that then led to this massive boom in technology. Now what we're trying to do is like, we're like, oh, that system sucks. Like, let's go build like a whole new like decentralized, like it's like returning to before the industrial age. Now, in some cases, it makes sense. So Bitcoin, for example, is trying to be resistant to state attack. It's trying to be the most secure computing network in the world. Decentralization makes a lot of sense. If you simply are trying to build a better computing system, though, centralization is probably better. And so I always describe the crypto world in 2 different bodies of work. One is a monetary revolution that trying to build decentralized money. Bitcoin, I think, will be the winner there. Then there's a technology revolution that's going on. A technology revolution is all about how do we get to more efficiency? We need high throughput and low fees, right? And so like, what do we see happening? Ethereum gets launched. Then Binance Smart Chain comes along, and the Binance Smart Chain was like, screw it. We're just going to go way more centralized, and we're going to be faster and cheaper, and we're going to have a higher throughput. And some percent of developers left Ethereum to go to Binance Smart Chain. Not all of them, but somebody said, I don't care about decentralization. I need fast throughput and low fees. And so they moved over. And so naturally what we're going to get is centralization is not good or bad. Decentralization is not good or bad. It's like when you sit down to build something and you say, okay, what am I trying to build and what am I optimizing? And when you make that decision, then you make specific trade-off decisions. I need this type of technology. We do this with, let's say database technologies. What database am I going to use? Sometimes people don't even pick the superior database technology. They just pick the one they've used before. Like, oh, I previously used the Amazon version, so like I'm familiar with it. I already have an account. I'll just use that one, right? And so I think we just got to kind of get out of the mentality of like decentralize every single thing, because actually there's some things that we want to be decentralized, or we want to be centralized because it leads to efficiency, and that's where value is.
Well, that sounds fantastic. That's also a lovely prism to look at things from on the particular use case that you're looking at, right? And then figure out which one works. I'm going to try and squeeze in one quick question before we open this out to a bunch of audience questions that are coming in. I know for a fact that you believe in the inherent value of Bitcoin, not just right now, but in the inherent value it holds in the future, right? And while it will most probably be the winner, any quick points on why it will be the winner?
On Bitcoin?
Yep.
I think that It ultimately comes down to three things. It's the most secure, independent monetary policy in the world. It is the most neutral, apolitical monetary policy in the world. And it is the most superior technological payment system in the world in terms of decentralization matched with efficiency, cost, etc. And so we look at those three things. If you want something that no one controls, no one can change, is completely unaffected by any political, situation, and can allow you to send value anywhere in the world instantaneously for free, while also ensuring that it's highly secure, there's only one option. And I think the world's kind of getting orange pilled on that as we go.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask Parth to share a bunch of very interesting questions that have come up.
Awesome, awesome. I think a few questions might go both ways, both to Pomp and Namit. But just to start with, I think Pomp, for the audience, how did you get started in this particular blockchain crypto world? If you can just highlight that, your journey in the initial, what was that like?
Yeah, so I got started mining. I was mining Ether in kind of end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And frankly, I didn't really have an opinion on like crypto, right? I didn't even really get pitched it that way. I just got pitched it as like, hey, there's this like cash flow machine. It's kind of like the magic money machine, right? Like plug it in and it makes money.
Yeah.
And then throughout 2017 into 2018, I did a way more work and kind of became much better informed about like Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, the underlying technology, etc. And then from there, just couldn't get it out of my mind and kind of ran with it.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. So I think the next question is slightly broader, but I mean, both for Namit and Pawan, and I'll start with Namit. So, your thoughts on India leading the Web3 crypto revolution? And, everyone's looking at India right now, after China, this is going to be India's decade, things like that. So, what are your thoughts on it, Namit?
Sure. Honestly, the way I see it is that the beautiful part about the Web3 space is that honestly, geography will not matter much. You can build something and then you can build it for a region or you can build it global from day one. I think what we have going for us here in India is that access to internet is incredibly cheap, right? I know friends in other countries who pay as much for uh, 1 GB of data a month as much as we get for 100 GB, right? Which is just incredible, which means access to devices, access to the internet is incredibly cheap. That just leaves you with intent. And I have a feeling that the minds of a lot of folks here are opening up to the intent part of it. So, as far as you have the intent to explore, it will happen. I genuinely think it's not necessarily solutions built for India, but built out of India because of ease of internet access and the intent changing with the ambitions that we've seen with a bunch of startups over the last 1.5 decade, right? It's no longer about passing out through school or college and then following a path that is already set. You can actually go out and do something on your own, which is why I think it might just be Indians or people from this region building out a bunch of very interesting global companies.
Awesome, awesome. Sounds amazing. Pomp, any thoughts? You've been monitoring India, I guess.
I believe that 1.4 billion people in India have the chance to lead on the global stage, and India is very unique in that people in the country understand being boxed out of the global financial system at no fault of their own. They understand that now there is this democratization of technology access. Anyone with an internet connection can play the game, and that's a huge, huge deal. And I tend to think that Americans get mad when I say this, but I tell them all the time. When I was in India, I saw the one thing that America has started to slack on, which is the Indian people. They believe in themselves. They're hungry. They want to be successful, right? They understand that there is an opportunity very similar to 20, 30, 40 years ago, this idea of the American dream. You had to go to America. And if you came to this country with, regardless of where you came from, what your wealth status, your education level, whatever, you had a shot. And that's all most people wanted was, I want to go to that place and I want a shot. Give me an opportunity to play the game. And now the beauty is you don't have to leave your bedroom.
Yeah.
You can do this from anywhere in the world. And so what we've done is we've exported the American dream, right, which was this idea globally, but the Americans didn't do that. They may try to take credit for it, but the Americans didn't do that. The internet did it. And now that anyone with an internet connection can play the game, that's a huge, huge deal. And I think that when you hand that power and that responsibility to 1.4 billion people in India, that's going to be exciting to watch over the next decade or so.
Awesome. Amazing. So my next question is more around the lines, but quick caveat, this is not investment advice. Do your own research. But any crypto blockchain projects that you are extremely, looking forward to? Maybe you might or might not have invested in them, but you're looking forward to where they'll be in a few years. Start at maybe 2 or 3 max, but starting with Namit, which ones do you think?
So personally, I believe very much in the ability for NFTs to change what's happening, and hence I'm looking at a bunch of platforms who are looking at innovating, right? Which means the way I see it is today there are 6 to 7 different use cases of what NFTs could look like. I don't think we've solved what the one use case is or what the main use case could be. But what I love is any of those, right? Whether it's ticketing or it's collectibles or it's property rights or it's music NFTs, right? What I love is that there are many experiments happening around it. So it isn't a couple of people doing that. It's 50, 100, 200 artists looking at whether it's music or looking at property rights or a bunch of these. So I'm looking at anyone innovating in this space, trying to figure what this could look like that could bring the next millions of people on. That's one. And the second one that I think that will be fairly big is I personally believe a lot of people love relaxing and spending their time playing games, right? And in those games, a lot of value today is in a way locked within that game. And I have a feeling that over the next few years, unlocking of that value. So we will see, think about 2007, 2008. You had to actually pay to buy a game and then receive the CD, and you paid for it once and then you played, right? And 2008-9 is when freemium started, started coming around. And initially, gamers were just wondering, why would I do that? But most games now, however large they are, actually launch as freemium. I have a feeling that we might see things like that happening with gaming, where a bunch of value which is unlocked or locked within the game will start getting unlocked across chains. So I'm looking at what gaming could be, and I'm looking at what NFTs can do. Yeah, this is largely where I'm currently at.
Yep. Pomp. And if you can
Yeah.
be specific about the names, please.
I was particularly not specific.
No, look, I always go back to most of my focus is devoted to Bitcoin. I think that is there's obviously things that will go up more than Bitcoin over the coming decade or 20 years. I tend to think that Bitcoin is the single most important technology in the world right now. And what I normally say to folks is if you boil down many global issues, whether domestically or internationally, to a first principle analysis, the corruption of money is at the root cause. And so if we can quite literally fix the money, we can fix the world. And that's a very, very powerful idea that has nothing to do with economic gain, right? It's just that there's a non-economic benefit there. So I think that's one. The second thing is I'm actually very bullish on the centralized platforms, which I know is not what people like to hear. I think that people want, like, what's the token I should go buy type answer. But I think that what we've seen is that the equities in the industry have drastically outperformed Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these. And so when you think about that, I don't think that will change over time. Like, I still think that if you're a seed investor in the next Coinbase, the next BlockFi, the next whatever, those will be quite good from an investment return standpoint. And then lastly is I'm very interested in what I would call the long tail of crypto. So like when I think of the market, there's Bitcoin is the most conservative asset, right? Like the young kids will say, oh, that's boomer coin, right? Like, okay, that's cool. I'm cool with that, right? I'm cool to have the thing that everyone knows is going to be around for a long time. So I'm okay with that. But then I basically jump to the furthest out, riskiest things I can find. So I actually skip the middle. And the middle to me is it's still super risky, just the returns aren't there from like a upside standpoint. So what I want is I either want good returns with almost no risk, which I think Bitcoin provides me, or I want insane risk and insane potential return. Yes. And so the middle area to me is mispriced risk, meaning that it's still way riskier than people actually think it is, but the returns don't compensate for that. So I kind of skip the middle and I go right to the end. And so when I think about that, I don't want to say any of the individual names because then people will go and kind of run with it. But the areas that I think are interesting definitely go around this idea of how do you coordinate resources, right? How to use economic incentives, but also like I'll mention, I won't say the name, but there's this idea of non-transferable ERC 721 tokens, right? Yep. But there's also this idea of like, what happens if I have a token in my wallet and you need to know that I have that token in order to give me access to a community or something like that? Well, right now that community then gets to see everything else that's in my wallet. That feels weird, right? It would be like if I walked up to a bar and I had to show my ID to get in. Not only is it weird that they get all to look at my personal information, but it'd be like me showing them everything in my wallet. You'd be like, hey, like that feels like violating me, right? And so I made an investment recently in something that allows for them to know that, yes, you do have that punk, or yes, you do have that ape, or yes, you do have, whatever the token is, but they don't get to actually see everything else in the wallet. And so like things like that are super interesting to me, where it's very clear what the use case is. Now there's still execution risk. There's still a lot of this stuff. But I think those are the types of technologies that I get interested in. I see people in the chat, the zero knowledge proofs, it's similar to a zero knowledge proof. They're doing it in like a different way. I think that that's the stuff that like is intellectually interesting to me. And so I spent a lot of time investing there.
Awesome. So I think we have 7 minutes left, so I'll just take the last 2 questions. But a lot of folks in the audience are, they're conscious about the environment, and Bitcoin comes up with the caveat of, the energy consumption that goes in mining and all those debates that go around. Just want to take like a very high level overview of, what do you think about it, and how should a layman or an investor should look at it?
In terms of mining?
Yep.
I mean, I think that you have to consume energy to do anything valuable in the world. And so like this whole argument of like it consumes energy, like, yeah, no shit, right? Like so does everything. Our military consumes energy, Christmas lights consume energy, your home consumes energy, right? Like all these things. So I think that that's kind of a mute point just on like it consumes energy, like duh. Then it comes to like how much energy, I think, is the next piece. And what we found is Bitcoin actually consumes less energy than any other money in the world. And it is likely, even if it was to rise to global reserve status, still consume less energy than any other money in the world. So like, I think we're pretty good there. And then it comes down to just like, what energy are you using? What's the type? Is it renewable? Is it coal? Is it whatever? And I think that we could always be better, right? It's important to say like, hey, this is something that we have to continuously improve. But I think when people see the data, they're surprised at how much renewables are used. They're surprised at how popular gas flaring capture is. And so I think that the story or the narrative sounds way worse than it really is when you look at the data. And that's just classic, you have reporters who, frankly, they're not experts on this stuff. They don't spend all day on it. they're doing the best they can. They read some report. Unfortunately, the critics are heavily incentivized to go and use the media as their tool, whereas the Bitcoin community kind of is like, every day are we going to pitch reporters? I'm like, we use renewables. We use renewables. Like, no, we're relegated pretty much to just like responding to the FUD rather than like creating anti-FUD preemptively. So I don't know. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, here's the other part. It doesn't matter. My opinion, the politicians, the media, none of those opinions matter. The economic incentive to mine Bitcoin is so strong that it has bootstrapped the strongest computer network in the world. And there are millions of people around the world trying to compete for Bitcoin every day. And that isn't going to go away.
Yep. That's a great articulation. Thank you. Just one, I think we're in the closing minutes. So just one last question. So we know a lot about, your Bitcoin interest and all the things that you speak about crypto, but what is Pomp outside the world of crypto? What are your personal interests? Anything that you want to share about your life outside this?
I like hanging out with my family. I like reading books, and I like screwing around on the internet. That's pretty much it. Right? Like I'm no different than anyone else. There's a lot of people on here who what do we like? I don't know. I see a funny meme I share with my friends, right? Like, I don't know, I'm just a normal dude.
Yeah, so pretty much like us. Yeah, I think just Pomp, I think we're done with the questions. There are a bunch of these, and I'll probably drop you these on your email, and maybe if you find time, you can tweet about them. But any closing thoughts to the budding entrepreneurs, operators, product managers of the crypto world of tomorrow? Any closing thoughts on them?
I think a huge piece is every single one of you now has the tools at your disposal that was previously only available to Americans sitting in Silicon Valley. And we have broken that down, and we've handed those tools to everyone globally. And if you look at the products, the services, the companies, the economic prosperity that was created by those businesses in Silicon Valley over the last 50 years, we should absolutely do better than that, bigger than that on a global scale. And if I had to pick one area globally that has a shot to do it better than anyone else, India is in my top 3. I think the US still has a really strong position from an innovation standpoint. It's got the history, it's got a lot of capital, etc. So I don't think the US goes away. I think that Nigeria has a huge piece. They got 200 million people. It's growing very quickly, very kind of internet high penetration. A lot of folks interested in Bitcoin cryptocurrency there.
Yeah.
And then I think India. I think those are the 3 areas that have a chance to be the leader. And you guys got some work to do to get your politicians on board. America's got some work. Nigeria's got some work to get our politicians on board, right? We all are kind of in the same position. But I think that's my biggest thing, is it's less about like any one piece of advice. And it's just that we have exported that American dream now. And that the fact you have the tools, you literally can be sitting in your bedroom in India. You can write some code and you can change the world. And that honestly wasn't possible 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now it's possible, and somebody's got to do it. Somebody on this call will do it. Somebody will build $1 billion company or a product, right? And when they do it, people will be like, how the hell did some kid in India do it? It's like, because this kid in India is no different than the kid in America now. And that's really special.
Awesome. All right. I think this was fun. But Pom, last thing, what is the best way? I think I reached you out on Twitter, but what's the best way to reach you out and share, crypto projects that people are working on?
I think Twitter. If you tweet at me or if you DM me, Twitter's probably the best way. It's the thing that I'm most responsive on. Don't tell the people who keep emailing me, but yeah, Twitter's by far the best one.
Awesome. This sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Pom. I think we just finished in time. I know you had a hard stop, but this was so much fun. I am already getting DMs for a 2.0 of this session soon. I think you are kind of a fan favorite here. And yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, have a great Friday and a great weekend ahead. And yeah, thanks a lot. Namit, thank you so much for moderating this whole chat. Always
Absolutely.
grateful to you. Not many people know, but Namit is my go-to crypto blockchain person out there in the world. So bug him if you want that, even investment advice with an asterisk. And yeah, that's all. Just a few announcements after this, so the audience can hold on. But thanks a lot, Namit and Pomp. Hope to see you again.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Mom.
Thank you
Very
guys so
nice
much.
chatting with you. Thanks, folks.
See you
See
guys later.
you. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Uh, to the audience, we have a few announcements. Um,
Pomp, I think you can just shut the
okay.
window. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. So to the audience, we have a few announcements. There is a crypto event happening in Bangalore day after on Sunday, and it's an invite-only event. So check out the Product House Twitter to apply for that. And it's an RSVP only, so we are curating the audience for that. But do check that out. Uh, there is a bonus Web3 session planned for April 2nd. It's basically on how to get started as a career in Web3. More details to follow on the Discord as well as Twitter. So keep a check on that. And yeah, third update is on the LMS. We're working hard to make it live as soon as possible. So whoever sort of attended these TPH sessions, it's going to be free for them to access. And yeah, that's pretty much from my end and the product house end. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Once again, thanks a lot to Polygon and AlphaWave for supporting this venture. And yeah, have a great Friday and a great evening. Bang, bang. See ya. Bye.